So my name is Miranda. I live in New York and I have ALD. So I found out that I had ALD when my son was 3 months old. We're fortunate enough to live in New York State, which is one of the 29 states that currently screens for ALD. So, and that's thanks to, I should say, the Seeger's family efforts. They were the ones that had Ames Law passed, which was named in honor of their son who passed away from the disease. And New York was the first state to actually begin screening. So we feel very fortunate to have benefited from their advocacy. So my son was picked up on the newborn screening panel for ALD. We found out when he was 12 days old that he had it. And then I consequently, needed to go for the genetic testing. And so, like I said, it was around when he was 3 months old that we did get those results back that confirmed that I was the carrier. So ALD is a rare genetic multi-system disease. So it's caused by a mutation in what's called the ABCD1 gene. And when you have that mutation and it's pathogenic, it can lead up to an accumulation in the body of what's called very long chain fatty acids. And that in turn can wear down on the myelin. And that's type of, it's kind of like the protective sheet that protects both the brain and the spinal cord. So those are the two main things that are affected. The adrenal glands are also often affected, primarily in men. So that's where the adrenal part of the disease comes in. So many with this disease will have what's called adrenal insufficiency or Addison's disease. So there's a lot of different phenotypes for ALD. The most devastating and most fearful for a mother, I guess, in my case, would be the childhood cerebral ALD. Which is said to affect anywhere between like 30 and 40% of males with ALD. It's devastating, it's fatal, and the only thing that can really stop it in its tracks is a cord blood or bone marrow transplant. And it's really important that that be done in a timely fashion, basically as soon as possible, which is why getting MRIs in childhood are really important, and knowing about the disease before you have symptoms is important, so that that transplant can make a difference. The adult version of ALD is called adrenal myeloneuropathy, or AMN, and this can affect both men and women. I know it's important to mention that because I know it's the same with a lot of X-linked diseases. Women are often thought to just be carriers, but with AMN, both men and women are affected. So that's kind of like a slower progressing disease, and there's a lot of variability from patient to patient, but the more common symptoms are walking and balance issues, neuropathy, so like pain and numbness in the limbs, just a general fatigue and weakness, and patients can also have urinary and sexual dysfunction. My son is 6.5. He's thankfully asymptomatic at this point, so he gets MRIs every 6 months. We also do blood work every 6 months just to check out his adrenal insufficiency status. We can see in the blood work that his adrenal glands are affected, but the body is still doing what it needs to do when put under stress. So we're not at the point in time where he needs medication. As for myself, it's kind of hard to say. I think I am experiencing some very mild symptoms. I'm in my late 30s. I do experience some numbness in the morning with my legs. I do have back pain. I do have to visit the bathroom more often than I would like, thanks to my bladder. But it's hard to say because I do suffer from some other conditions. I have a hormone condition. I've also had spinal fusion due to severe scoliosis. So I've had a hard time distinguishing what to attribute what to. But it's something I'm definitely mindful of and thankful that I have this information ahead of time if it gets worse, throughout the years. On my son's 13th day of life, because like I said, we found out when he was 12 days old, we were squeezed into the schedule of the metabolic center that was closest to us for newborn screening. So that was in New York City. And we met with a nurse practitioner in the genetics department. And, this is her job, to meet with families that are diagnosed with something on the newborn screening panel. So she went over a lot of information with us, what ALD was, all the different manifestations of the disease. She also went in depth about what my son's monitoring schedule would look like. And then she also mentioned that we could meet with a genetic counselor when we were ready, if we wanted to explore what the different options were. So I think it was around the time he was 3 months old. Once we confirmed that I definitely also had the mutation, was when we decided to go and talk to the genetic counselor. After 18 months of thought, prayer, deliberation, and probably most importantly, communication, my husband and I did decide that we were not going to grow our family. So when my son was a year and a half old, he underwent a vasectomy, my husband. So we had researched both tubal ligation, so me getting my tubes tied versus my husband getting the vasectomy. And statistically speaking, in terms of safety, in terms of effectiveness, it looked like the vasectomy was the way to go. So that's what we did. The procedure was done in an office, a few hours. It was same day. The way his doctor did it, and I have a feeling this is the way they all operate, is they schedule the vasectomies on Friday, with the thinking being you take off from work on Friday, you're a little sore on Saturday, a little discomfort on Sunday, but then by Monday, you're back to work, none the wiser. And that was honestly the case. It really wasn't that bad at all. So big factors that led into our decision was basically the stress of IVF and then also PGT on top of IVF. So the pre-implantation genetic testing. We know several families that went through IVF. So we were familiar, with the toll it could take, specifically on women, just because you're obviously putting your body through that process. And then the PGT on top of that, the stress of screening the embryos and, hoping for the best. I think we just feared that emotional exhaustion. And quite frankly, I think we also feared our son getting sick. And we just kind of wanted to conserve our emotional energy and resources, even financially, just in the event that he did get sick. That just kind of like always seemed to be our priority. And, we weren't terribly afraid of him being an only child. I'm sure that's something that comes up in the minds of parents, rightfully so. I know it certainly wasn't what we had pictured, when we when we found out we were pregnant for the first time. But we're very blessed in that we have 4 nieces who are all within a year or two in age of my son. They're all local to us. 2 of them actually live less than half a mile away. So we feel very fortunate that, while we couldn't give him siblings, he is growing up alongside his cousins. It's like kind of a hard question to answer, but I think so finding out that my son had this disease on his 12th day of life was obviously like a very traumatic thing to go through. I vividly remember the day we got the phone call. I remember the expression on my husband's face. I remember him saying, and that's what he has. And I think there was a part of me that knew in that moment that I wasn't going to be having any more children. And I know that sounds crazy, but the world as I knew it just kind of shattered at that point. And even though I didn't even know what it was, right? So, I'm just hearing the other side of the conversation. I didn't even know what he was diagnosed with, but I just kind of knew in that moment that whatever it was all I could handle. And, that I was just going to focus on loving him and taking care of him as best as we could. So I was kind of like stuck in that moment for a long time. And I think it's also important for me to say that my husband did not feel the same way as I did at first. We were definitely in like different levels of acceptance. So in times of crisis, and I've always been this way, my brain sort of like processes it instantly and automatically goes to whatever the worst case scenario is. And that's what I was doing. And my husband's brain, thankfully, for the sake of our marriage and our family, does not work that way. He's very calm, cool, collected. And, he said, let's wait a minute, let's really process this. Who knows? This could even be a mistake. These mistakes happen. And I mean, unfortunately for our case, it wasn't. But I just did want to mention that it took time. It really took, like I said, 18 months for us to really talk this over and decide that this was ultimately what we were going to do. And it was good because in that time, my son had already had 3 endocrinology appointments. He had already been through that first MRI, which was really scary. So we felt like, at that point, we kind of had a good handle of what life was going to look like for his monitoring. And we were confident in our decision. So there isn't much I would change. I was definitely happy that we waited as long as we did to make a decision. The only thing is I might encourage another family to meet with a fertility specialist in addition to meeting with a genetic counselor. We never did this, and I'm honestly not sure why. I don't know if we just didn't think of it, or I don't know, knowing me, maybe I was afraid that they were gonna like be pushy and change my mind. But either way, I think a fertility specialist is going to be up to date on what the current science is that is available for families. This field is like changing rapidly. So I think that's really important. And then they can also run those preliminary tests just to see what, you're a good candidate for. So for example, 6 months after my husband's vasectomy, I found out that I had something called primary ovarian failure, which basically means I was in early menopause. I was in my early 30s, and my numbers were so bad that they said it had probably started even before I had my son, which, made us realize he was even that much more of a blessing. But obviously it's so great if you can have this knowledge about yourself, before heading into something. It's just kind of like critical information you'd want so that you're making the most informed decision for your family. I think the biggest challenge with making the choice that we did was just dealing with what the rest of the world had to say about it. We're 2 private people. We kind of figured this was a decision that should be made between the 2 of us, but it can be very difficult navigating the words of well-intentioned people, but maybe sharing opinions that were never asked for. So for us, at least for me, that was the biggest challenge, just kind of drowning out that noise for the 1.5 years and just focusing on the conversation between the 2 of us. So if I could go back in time, I would reassure myself that I'm doing the right thing for my marriage. And it sounds super corny, but I would also tell myself how brave I am. I remember driving my husband to the vasectomy appointment and just feeling so cowardly, like this overwhelming feeling that we were giving up on something major. And I think it's because I was surrounded virtually by parents in the ALD community that were doing everything in their power to have more children, emotionally, financially. I'm in awe of them to this day. But I think, being surrounded by that and driving to this appointment, I just have this overwhelming feeling like, wow, I'm chickening out. And it took me a while to realize that what we decided to do was just as brave. It was just kind of brave in a different way. I think we realized what we could and couldn't handle. And I'm proud of us to this day that, we took the initiative to do what was best for our family.